Hey, listener, it's me, KP again. It's good to be back. I don't know how many people tuned in last time. It's not like radio comes with a follower count, but I know at least somebody was listening. I found a letter addressed to me. Doesn't matter where I found it, I'm trying to maintain at least sort of a modicum of operational security here, but it was just a short note. 4 words. It said, "Steer clear of Dynacorp." I'm choosing to interpret that as friendly advice instead of a threat. So, listener, don't worry. I'm not looking to make new trouble. Just trying to bring some truth to mysteries that have haunted my home since before I was born. This is the Cold Cases of Glacier Falls. Today I've got a weird one for you all, listeners. Well, weird in a relative sense. I pulled a random file out of the stack I got from the Glacier Falls Historical Society, and, well, this is what I found. I actually grew up hearing about this one, I think. Just rumors. The kind of warnings parents give their kids. In 1994, there was a rash of strange medical occurrences among Glacier Falls residents. It was called Rubin syndrome, after the local doctor that treated the first rash of patients, Dr. Joseph Rubin. But people around here might know it better as Hiker's Haze. So this story comes from the personal notes of Dr. Rubin, a copy of which is here in this file from the Glacier Falls Historical Society, and it starts with who he calls Patient Zero. Patient Zero was a man in his mid-40s. He's not named here for confidentiality, but the notes say that he was in good health. He was married and had 2 children and 1 dog. Patient Zero, in addition to being the statistically average American man, reportedly liked to get up in the early hours of the morning and hike a few hours every week. And on May 12th, 1994, he took his dog Lucy up to hike around the area of Snow Lake. Zero, as we'll be calling him, was hiking before dawn. The sky would have been lightning, but he was still in relatively low visibility. That apparently didn't matter to him because he was familiar with the area and a very experienced hiker. He had just entered a large clearing close to the lake itself when he said he became very tired and sluggish. It should be said that Snow Lake is only around 4,000 feet above sea level. Altitude sickness usually starts around 8,000 feet, or, for people who are very sensitive to it, as low as 6,000. Dr. Rubin made sure to ask about Patient Zero's background, and Zero reported that not only had he been hiking in these mountains for years, he'd grown up in the region and lived here his whole life, and had never experienced altitude sickness, even on challenging hikes. Despite that, Zero got so tired during this walk that he decided to lay down in the grass by the lake. The trail was completely deserted at this point, and Zero describes that he laid his head in wet grass and watched as the sun was starting to rise over the ridge. He didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke up to Lucy's barking. She was right up against his face, barking so loud it made his ears ring. Zero said he felt dizzy, disoriented. And then he realized the sun was up, shining brightly over dewy grass reflected over Snow Lake. He checked his watch. He'd been asleep almost 6 hours. He was late to work. Patient Zero got up, dusted himself off, and hiked back to his car with Lucy. A day later, he came to Dr. Rubin's office. Rubin's notes say that the patient presented as very mild-mannered and pleasant. He said he felt fine and that he had only come because his wife had insisted. When Rubin asked what was wrong, Zero replied that his wife thought he had, quote, something on his back, unquote. Rubin's inspection of the patient's back revealed deeply red pockmarks all across the affected area. There were dozens of these small welts, each no larger than a pinky nail, and each containing a small raised indentation in the center, like a pinprick. Rubin described it as looking similar to as if the patient had been in for an allergy panel. He then asked patient Zero if he was in any discomfort or pain, and Zero said he felt fine. Dr. Rubin ended up prescribing Zero hydrocortisone pills in case he was experiencing an oddly presenting allergic reaction, and told him to come back if the symptoms worsened or didn't go away. Zero took them, thanked the doctor, and left. 3 days later, Zero returned to Dr. Rubin's office. Rubin's notes get more halting at this point. The ink bleeds on the pages, I guess because his pen just stayed in one place too long, creating these little blots. He describes how Zero sort of waltzed into the room, humming to himself. His eyes had a dreamy quality, and he reportedly had to be reminded to respond to questions several times. Zero's wife, once again, had begged him to return. She had even given him a handwritten note to give to Dr. Rubin, urging Rubin to give Zero a full-body examination. When Rubin was able to do so, he records his own reaction as speechless. There were layers of the pockmarks, not just on his back, but all the way down. The entirety of the patient's backside, from neck down to ankles. Rubin could identify pockmarks which had days of healing, but he could estimate that there were at least 3 rounds of the pockmarks in various stages. The patient's back was mottled, inflamed red into bruised purple and green. He asked once again if Zero was in any discomfort, to which Zero replied, none at all. In fact, Zero added that lately he'd been feeling younger, less achy. He said he was spending more and more time hiking, and his legs had never felt so sprightly and strong. Rubin pressed him on the hiking, wondering if Zero could have been exposed to a rare allergen, or perhaps even suddenly developed an allergy he was unaware of. Zero replied then, oh yes, he was spending lots of time hiking. In fact, he'd suddenly decided to cash in half his PTO days for the year, so he could spend all day hiking around Snow Lake, except he couldn't take his dog anymore because she kept barking at him and disrupting nature. At this point, Rubin was properly alarmed, but he had no definitive answers. The hydrocortisone pills appeared to help the oldest pockmarks heal, so he added a prescription for cortisone cream and told Zero to come back in a few days. He took photos and spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone with colleagues, trying to identify the source of the rash. He ended up on a call with a dermatologist from California, who advised him to go to his patient's hiking route and collect samples of plants and have them tested for bugs. The dermatologist told him that there were some species of microscopic mites that could cause a similar-looking reaction, and if there were large enough populations on a popular hiking trail, Rubin should report that to local wildlife authorities. Rubin took the advice. He said the sun was almost setting as he was hiking up to Snow Lake, dusk turning the tips of the mountains a dusty purple. It's said that Snow Lake is one of the best hikes in the entire Pacific Northwest, and I haven't traveled much, but I believe them. The valley of the lake is so pristine, and the waters are so crystal clear, it's like looking through glass. then if you keep hiking upwards towards the mountain peaks, you'll get to the meadows. That's where Zero told Reuben that he was. It was nearly dark by the time Dr. Reuben got there. He surveyed the area as best he could with the flashlight he brought and started taking samples. He clipped grasses, bushes, flowers. He bagged them all separately. He even took soil samples and bagged those too. But then he hit something and stumbled. He said he tumbled head over foot into the grass. Winded but not injured, he turned over his shoulder and saw a shape emerge from the grass. The silhouette of a head and shoulders tilted curiously at him. Then another. And another. 3 people sat up in the grass, staring at him with owlish, unblinking eyes. Reuben asked, "What are you doing here?" And one of their voices responded, "Just lying down." Where did the sun go? Dr. Reuben had just met patients 1, 2, and 3, a family of visiting hikers from Maine. They'd laid down in the grass and hadn't gotten up for hours. After some convincing, Reuben managed to coax the patients to his office after hours. They were a 43-year-old man, a 45-year-old woman, and a 15-year-old girl. All 3 of them displayed the pockmarking Reuben had seen on patient 0, and worse, they exhibited the same dreamlike characteristics. By this point, Reuben was panicked. He prescribed them hydrocortisone, told them to drive back to their hotel, and urged them not to hike for the rest of their trip. As soon as they were gone, he called the Center for Disease Control. He reported that at least 4 people had a concerning set of matching symptoms that appeared to alter behavior. He reported the pockmarks, the dreaminess, the time loss, the connection to the meadows near Snow Lake. The person he spoke to on the phone mirrored Reuben's concern and promised to coordinate a CDC response. The CDC contact said they'd be in touch. Reuben said in his notes that he calmed down significantly after that. He spent some time just breathing, reassuring himself that this kind of thing happened all the time on a scale of the country like the US, and that there were systems in place to stop them from escalating. Now is probably a good time to mention that Reuben self-described as anxious. He grew up in Virginia and went to Tufts School of Medicine in Boston. After that, he was a resident in a major Boston emergency room, and he said the experience turned him into a nervous wreck. The sleepless nights, the endless pain, the way every moment could be seized upon by some new tragedy. He grew to hate it. The second he was out of his residency, he moved to Glacier Falls, where his parents had gone after retiring, and opened a practice as a small-town family doctor. He preferred it that way. In any case, Dr. Reuben stated in his personal notes that he considered himself to be, quote, precisely the worst doctor to be in this kind of situation, unquote. Finally, sometime in the middle of the night, Dr. Reuben remembered his bagged samples. By then, he'd already locked up his practice and gone home, but that didn't stop him from laying out all of his carefully bagged samples on the table. Reuben wasn't a botanist, an entomologist, or a geologist, but he wrote that part of him hoped he would recognize something in what was there, some grass or seed or mineral he'd been warned about in medical school, some obvious answer to the problem. He was hoping in the morning he'd be able to call the CDC and tell them, "So sorry, it was actually a rare variation of poison ivy. Cancel the army platoon you're obviously sending our way." But his samples resisted easy answers. He had meadowgrass, sedgegrass, fescue. He had vivid purple lupine flowers, snow-white avalanche lilies, pink western coral root, even a few species of orchid. Nothing he recognized as dangerous, and nothing he could identify alone. Dr. Rubin reported that he slept badly that night. He kept waking up in the middle of a dream, thinking he could smell the meadows. When dawn finally crested, he felt disoriented, out of place, somehow dizzy. But the first thing he did was mail the samples to his dermatologist friend in California, who had promised they had the facilities to test the samples for bugs. Their equipment was designed to do so on human skin, not plant matter, but they assured Rubin that they'd have answers. Rubin paid extra to have the package shipped overnight. And then, with nothing left to do but wait, Dr. Rubin returned to the meadow. All through his hike up, he was plagued by worry. He said he didn't know exactly what his intention was, just that he felt he had to be there. He started to worry about patient 0, whether he was staying away from the trails like Rubin recommended, the visiting family from Maine. With every step, he became more and more sure in his intention, that he was going to march around that meadow all damn day long if he had to, just to make sure no one laid down in it. It was mid-morning by the time Rubin got up to the meadow. He stepped cautiously through the wildflowers, his pants stuffed into his socks, making sure no one else was there. When he felt satisfied he was alone, he breathed a sigh of relief. This part is so specific because evidently most of Rubin's handwritten account was made this afternoon. He sat on a rock, watching the trail as it led into the meadow, writing, a silent guardian over the valley. I'm looking at his pen strokes now, listener. Let me tell you, translating this doctor's scrawl up until this point has been a challenge, but these next few pages, the cursive just starts turning to these slow, loopy scribbles. The lines just get looser and looser until it's just a wave. After this point, there's no more in media res documentation from Dr. Rubin. The rest is in formal typed statements in the case file, so I'll try to piece together the rest of the narrative for both of us. Dr. Rubin didn't remember falling asleep in the meadow. He was shaken awake by a park ranger who looked extraordinarily concerned. Dr. Rubin didn't remember much from that conversation later, except for the fact that the ranger knew his name without him saying so. That ended up being because a search and rescue team had been looking for him for hours. Rubin had been laying in the meadow for 2 days. His friend in California had looked at the samples and called him back, and when they were unable to get a response after several attempts, they grew worried and called the Glacier Falls authorities. Upon realizing that he had 2 days' worth of missed appointments with patients, a search was organized. When he was found, Rubin was suffering from extreme dehydration and sunburn. But as he reports in the medical record, at the time he felt no pain of any kind. Just a strange, dreamy haze, as if nothing in the world mattered. Dr. Rubin had become patient 5. There's no more narrative information after this, unfortunately, listeners. Rubin stopped writing in his personal journal. There are just case facts in medical reports and few of them. I dug into records from the Cascadia Register for this whole month, for that whole spring, but there are no mentions of Dr. Rubin apart from one small article about the search and rescue operation. Rubin syndrome, or hiker's haze, appears in a few small medical journals in the late 90s, but that's all I can find. So, here's the rest of the case facts. All 5 patients experiencing symptoms had those symptoms remit after a period of 2 to 3 weeks. On patient 0, the pockmarks healed into scar tissue from what appeared to be repeated exposure, but each of them healed, and even the desire to return to the meadow seemed to abate after a month or 2. Rubin's Californian dermatologist never found any harmful bugs on the samples they examined. The report indicates normal population levels of mites and no unexpected or invasive species. To this day, the cause of the pockmarks and the odd behavior remains unknown. But I'm noticing something here. listeners. The dermatologist from California sent pictures of the samples back to Ruben for documentation purposes, and they're here. These plants were a week old at that point, and there had been sample degradation. And Ruben didn't take any pictures before he sent the samples, so it's not like I'm comparing a before and after here. It's just that, well, one of the samples, a pink orchid, its roots have gotten through the plastic bag. The bag's not torn open in the photo. In fact, it looks like these delicate green roots have just pierced it like precise little needles, reaching for something outside. I consulted a friend, and she said that it looks like a calypso orchid. Funny name, I thought. The name Calypso comes from the legend of a nymph in Greek mythology. When Odysseus washed up on her island, she kept him there for 7 years against his will. She promised him immortality if he stayed. Her name means to conceal. And in the end, it took the intervention of gods to get Calypso to let Odysseus go. I don't know. It could be nothing. I just have a feeling. In any case, the story of Rubens syndrome ends with a fire. It was dry that year, and coincidentally, a wildfire swept through that area of Snow Lake, charring the meadow to a crisp. It happens periodically around these parts, but it is convenient that that area was hit just 2 weeks after Rubens' incident. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. And there is one more thing. The CDC never got back in touch. As far as I can see, the CDC is never even mentioned in any official reports after this, and I think it would have shown up in news coverage if they were around. It makes me wonder, was Ruben so nervous he convinced himself that conversation happened? Or did something stop the CDC from intervening, and if so, how? So many things about this story bother me, listener, and this doesn't end clean. But for me, next time you're out hiking, keep an eye out near the meadows. That's all from me this time, listeners. Keep looking between your radio stations, and you'll find my next broadcast with more cold cases from Glacier Falls. KP out. The Cold Cases of Glacier Falls is a production of Alien Airwaves, written and performed by Grayson Van Arsdale. Thank you to Behold for the use of music off the album Where They Landed, which you can check out in the link below.